Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So it turns out that last year we finished up Parshat Vayigash. And so what I am going to do is, of course, go back to Genesis. We're going to pick up where we left off tomorrow. Oh my gosh. Yes, left off yesterday, excuse me, left off yesterday. And the thing that I think that distracted me is because when I looked at that material, it was totally arcane. And then I went back and went over the material. And first of all, without the vowels, it's so easy to misread something. There are words that look exactly the same, except the context tells you the vowels, etc. And so it makes a lot more sense now. So let me get into the text for you. Let me share the text. Hold on a second. But it was such a cool experience of starting off, not being able to understand something and then going back over it and it becoming clearer as to what was happening there. So here's the text, and this is where we left off yesterday, yes. Hataninim hagdolim, the great sea monsters. So this word tanin is not, I think sometimes it's even translated as dragons, At any rate, the hachi targimu, okay, so he says, this is the way you need to translate this particular word, right? Arzile diyama, arzile diyama, which means I think the Svaria translates it as mammoth beasts of the sea. But I looked up Jastro to this word arzile, and he talks about sea gazelles, which I've never heard of. But at any rate, diyama means of the sea. So this word also caught me yesterday because it's Aramaic, diyama, of the sea. And I was looking at it and saying, Dima? What's Dima? Okay, well, it's diyama, that's why. Clear enough. All right, so that makes sense there. Oops, so sorry. I'm just trying to, sometimes it's just changes size on me so fast. Okay, so let's take a look at what Baruch Halevi Epstein says about that. And that would be Nun Hey. Let's take a look. Hey, here we go. Hu Re'em Shebayam. So the Re'em must mean the whale, right? He's talking about the whale in the ocean. V'hiskiru beyichud, and they explain it especially. In other words, they want to explain that when it says, because think about it, taninim is a generalization. It sounds like a generalized word, but they're choosing to translate it as a specific animal. So that's sort of interesting there, right? Let's take a look. Okay. Just finding the place, right. Mipnei shehu hagadol shebachayot. So he says, and the reason why they specify that animal as opposed to all large animals, large sea creatures, is because it is the largest of all creatures. And I believe that is the case, right? In fact, an elephant, which I think is the largest land animal, is small, very small, compared to, say, a sperm whale. V'yunach alav to'ar gadol. And so it makes sense to describe it, to use the adjective great. And that's why we're explaining it as arzile de yama. But Rabbi Yochanan Amar, however, Rabbi Yochanan is a very, very prominent rabbi in Talmudic times. He's considered a Palestinian Amora, and because he lived the Romans were the ones who decided to call Judea Palestine, right? Because they were trying to really stick it to the Jewish people because they were constantly rebelling, and it was a way of payback. At any rate, Rabbi Yochanan is actually credited, I believe, with the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Talmud of Jerusalem. At any rate, he said, he's quoted a lot in the Babylonian Talmud as well. You should know that. And this is a quote from the Babylonian Talmud here. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Ze Leviathan. This is referring to the Leviathan, the Leviathan. Nachash Bariach. So he says the Leviathan that is the snake like a bolt of a door, right? Like a bar that with which you lock a door. The Leviathan Nachash Akalton, and a Leviathan, a serpent that is convoluted. That's Sharfstein, that his translation of the Torah Temimah. I've mentioned this before. Sharfstein did a great job in translating this part, the upper part of the Torah Temimah, and their footnotes in his text. I've never found a translation of the footnotes. In other words, what you and I are doing in looking below the line, I'm not sure if there's any translation out there. I even looked on Sefaria. I couldn't find a translation of it, although there's a beautifully printed text of this area here in Sefaria. So this is one of those cases where one begs for exactly what was the point that Rabbi Yochanan was making. And at least Torah Temimah is helpful in clarifying what's going on here and why these particular terms for it, right? So it would appear that Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with this particular interpretation and says, no, it's because in this case, we're still using the plural of the animals, right? Whereas Rabbi Yochanan is saying it's the Leviathan, it is the Leviathan. He narrows it down even more, that basically we're simply talking about two animals, the male Leviathan, as you're going to find out, and the female, right? So, going on. Romez Leviathan Zachar, that is to say that this verse alludes to the male Leviathan and the Leviathan Nekeva and the female Leviathan, Leviathan. Go in and find here. Nekeva, Shehazachar, because the male Mechuna Nachash Bariach, he is described as a bolt, a serpent like a bolt of a door. Why? And so here he's trying to help us understand why it would be called that. Because it is erect like a bolt of a door, right? And erect doesn't necessarily mean vertical, okay? I don't think that's what it's referring to, although zakuf could refer to really erect in that sense, but I think it means, it's solid, and zakuf could also have that meaning to it, but also, and stretches out straight. And here and in some ways explaining the female helps us understand the male. V'hanekeva mechuna akalton, and the female is described as what did I say, right? She is like
convoluted.
Convoluted, thank you.
Yeah.
I just couldn't remember the word. Thank you. Referred as convoluted, thank you. Mipnei shemakefet et kol haolam, because she surrounds the entire world, kenachash, like a snake, shedarcho lahakif, whose tendency, or who is of the habit to encircle, right? You think of the constrictors, right? And also the way they will eat their food and swallow it. Like I think of the egg eater and how it swallows the entire egg. But I think here he's referring to the way in which a snake will surround and squeeze the life out of its animal like a constrictor. So the question is, again, it's still begging a question of why he went in this direction, why Rabbi Yochanan went in this direction. Rabbi Yochanan, and the fact that Rabbi Yochanan isn't comfortable bidrasha hakodemet with that previous interpretation, deka'e al hara'im shabayam, which refers simply to whales, right? Whales that are in the ocean. Yesh lomar, one could say, mishum de kevan shebra'am, okay, because we hear, okay, that we could say that since he created them, lo shamanu shegam hanekeva hi gedola. We did not learn that the female was also as large, kamo hazachar, as the male. So here's we've got the female encircling the world, and yet it's not as big. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay, let's see why he says that. Lo hava le lo mar tninim hagodolim. Okay, so I need to okay. I think he says with the whale, we have not learned that the female is as large as the male. That is, that in actual fact, female whales are smaller than the male whales. That's the point here, why Rabbi Yochanan isn't happy with that interpretation. Lo hava le lomar tninim gedolim. And since the female in the whale isn't as large as the male, it shouldn't have said, right? It should not have said tninim gedolim. It shouldn't have said tninim. I won't translate it for a second, right? Tninim gedolim, large, in other words, that they're both, right? That all of them are large. Belashon rabim, using the plural form here. Ella hatnanin hagadol. It should have then had said the large tanin, okay? The one, the male, which is large. V'lachen darish, and for this reason, he interprets it, the ka'e al leviatan zachar unekeva, and that's why he says that it refers to the male and female leviatans. That is, I'm sorry, I have to back up on what I had said before because I wasn't interpreting it well. And that is to say that both the male and the female leviathan are large, are huge. They're both huge. And that's why he says tninin gedolim, because both of them are as large as, each is as large as the other. V'shapir katav b'lashon rabim. And for this reason, the Torah made total sense in using the plural form there. And I think what's interesting is, and you may be doing this as well, thinking back on the sun and the moon and remember, and how initially they were both the same size, and then the moon complained, right? We just had that interpretation. And here we have once again this issue of Gedolim, right? We had the luminaries that were large, and now we have these Taninim that are also Gedolim. And I wonder if there is some kind of literary connection between these passages. Because again, I'm not certain what the Leviathan really represents. My feeling is that there is some kind of literary or mythical aspect to it that in some way speaks to a certain psychological place for human beings. And I'm wondering, okay, just to try and to play this out a little bit, if I may, and that is the fact that it would seem that the Leviathan, all right, are actually destructive. They're actually destructive forces, this powerful destructive forces in the world. But the issue is that God is going to destroy, and I think this is actually scriptural, that God is going to destroy the Leviathan in the end, and that the righteous will feast on the meat from the Leviathan, which is very interesting. So thinking about that, so we're talking about something that is essentially destructive, and yet in the future, the righteous will feed on it. And I think that there's something powerful being said here in terms of negative forces in the world and in the universe, and positive, and how they might turn out to be actually very positive forces. So that's just, a quick dip into trying to understand. And of course, I could be totally wrong. I'm speculating. I'm just trying to sense what is underneath these kinds of statements that in some ways are quite puzzling. So I'm happy. Yes, good. Golda?
Yeah, I'm wondering, because they don't say the word fish, there are no dagim in this. Are they trying to make sure that we know that they are not dagim?
Oh,
Whatever they are not fish.
Okay, so I think you're raising what is a very good point about the word dog in Hebrew. So
Hmm.
fish in English has a more technical meaning than the word dog in in Hebrew, because the word dog, I believe, can refer basically to a sea creature, to some, well, not necessarily at sea, but a water animal. In other words, an animal that lives in the water. I'm not sure if crustaceans are included in that term dagim. They may well be included in it, but it isn't that it has to have fins and scales. So, the fact that whales are mammals or that the Leviathan is a sui generis animal, it still would be called, I believe, a dog because it dwells in the ocean. So I think, or in the sea, in water. I think that they were, in effect, fascinated by the fact that we have these animals that are able to survive in a place where human beings or land creatures would drown, right? So, the fact that fish or sea, marine, well, marine would be ocean, but basically animals that live in water are able to, extract the oxygen. I'm not saying they would have described it this way, but we know ourselves that the gills are capable of extracting the oxygen in the water so that the fish can live. But it's still, in a way, I still think in some ways, it's amazing and fascinating that nature provides us with that. So I don't think it's an issue of terminology on that level. And I think, Golda, honestly, I know it wasn't the point necessarily you were trying to make, but I think it's important because remember, in the book of Jonah, the
Right.
animal that swallows Jonah is called a dog. It's called a
Right.
dog.
He's a big fish. He's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
dog. Yeah, Dagadola. Yeah.
Right. And I think a ra'aim, a whale, would be considered a dog gadol.
Oh, okay. So it's
Yeah.
a general term for things that swim in the ocean
Right, that
or the
live
waters.
in the ocean,
Yeah.
right,
Live
as
in the
opposed
ocean.
to
Okay.
right, as opposed to land creatures which would drown.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I mean, I'm
It's
not
either
saying
that or it's dinosaurs,
that.
so you could go with
Yes,
dinosaurs
I
there.
know.
That's
I tend to think that's
well, you said dragons. So
yes, I know. And maybe they were aware of something that they did not find anymore. It's possible. It's
yeah.
possible. Although I want to point out very clearly that the Bible is essentially, even if it isn't a history in the Greek sense, it nevertheless is talking about time that's chronological. It's talking about chronological time. And that very term prehistoric is referring to non-chronological time. And dinosaurs live in the prehistoric era. And that's partly because the Torah is not trying to be a scientific work. It is a spiritual work and it is a spiritual guide. And it's not trying to, in as much as it shares history, quote, quote, it's there for us to learn. In other words, to be able to learn from past experiences and not repeat the mistakes. So I think that's that element there. I'm going to go on, even though our time is running out, but let me keep going. So here we go. At the end of the creating let's make sure I've got the right place here. Right. Okay. We're talking about the fifth day where we have the sea animals, and the sixth day, right? Vayomer Elohim totzei haaretz nefesh chaya lamina. So now we have the land, the earth, taking out, bringing forth living souls, living creatures according to their species. Behema, cattle, beremis, and swarming creatures, v'chai eretz, and wild animals of the earth, limina, according to its species, vahichen, and so it was. And we talk about how God actually made these things, all right? And of course, vayar Elohim ki tov, that God saw how good it was, right? So now this is the verse we're going to look at. Wait a second. Am I leaving something out? Okay, because I want to see. Okay.
I've got something with the souls.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
because they don't stipulate male and female like they do later in for Noah, bring them all
Yes,
male and female,
yes,
but they
yes,
use the word souls. And later on we discussed um going into Egypt and the 70
yes,
souls, and I believe you said something, because I wrote it down,
yes.
about souls being a pair of, husband and wife.
Uh-huh. Right,
So
right.
that,
Interesting. Yes,
yeah.
that's interesting. Okay. So actually, thank you. Thank you. That
Okay.
is helpful. I want to go back on what we're about to look at. So what it's referring to here is back in verse 22, where it says, Vayvarech otam Elohim lemor. So this is the sea creatures and the birds. So the sea creatures and the birds are given a blessing. And this is the first time, of course, we come to the word Vayvarech, right? To bless. And if you think about the word bless, it's not so clear exactly what it means. Other than a good word, is it nothing more than a benediction, right? A good word? Or is there something more to it? So in other words, is there something that this term good word carries, more specific? And here we have pru urvu, be fruitful and multiply, umil'u et hamayim bayamim, and fill the waters in the seas, v'ha'of yirev ba'aretz, and let the birds multiply on earth. Okay, so that is the nature of blessing, and that's why they say that there was a rabbi, a famous rabbi whose name escapes me right now, I'm sorry to say, who said that the first time you come across a word in the Torah and you look, and if it's defined there, that's the meaning of the word. So to bless essentially has the connotation of plenitude. In other words, you never have to run out of it. It's multiplying, it's getting bigger and bigger, it's enlargement. That is blessing. If you're blessed, it means somehow, in some sense, and maybe in more than one sense, you are being enlarged. That's what you're hoping for in blessing something, in wanting it to be fruitful and multiply. And of course, fruitful can mean a whole bunch of different things, right? Essentially along the same lines. So it's interesting that on the fifth day, God uses the term blessing, and then on the sixth day, God is going to bless these animals that he's creating here, along with human beings, At any rate, let's take a quick look here at the Torah Temimah here. Vayvarech otam, he blessed them. Tana bar kapara. Bar kapara says, Betula nisait bervi'i. You would never, ever guess that he's going in this direction, right? He says, a virgin is betrothed on the fourth day of the week, v'niv elet b'chamishi, and is consummated on the fifth day. So in other words, on Thursday, right? Why? And the reason for this, and again, we would not likely come up with this reason, is because a blessing for the fish, right, was made on this day, on the fifth day. That's why. We're going to explain this. I'm going to leave this essentially as a cliffhanger for God willing tomorrow, and we will explain what's going on here. Anyway, Nemar, he goes on to quote, Vayvarech otam Elohim, God blessed them, saying, Pru urvu v'gomer, be fruitful and multiply, etc. And that's from the tractate Ketuvot, and that's looks like it's page 5, the A side of the page, and we will save this for tomorrow.
Is that saying God blessed the fish that way?
Yes, yes, he did, by
For the
saying
sea
be fruitful and
creatures?
multiply. Yes, indeed. I know. But wow, I mean, that's part of what's fun about this is you're not expecting this particular interpretation. It's like out of left field. And on the surface, it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle. Where does he get this? So there's some, as they say, splaining to do. And with this, I'm going
It's
to
also a reminder. This is what you're supposed to do. It's like,
yes, of course.
by the way, it's
Yeah,
okay for you to do this because I am sanctioning it.
yes. Well, well, in a way, this is a continuation of, of the process that God began.
Right.
So again, beautifully in line with the very purpose of living, which is to take this process and, move it along, help in this way.